And this is the moment that it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the last session, the keynote speaker, and the keynote speaker for the last session of today. This session will be chaired by Dr. Randy Bennett from the ETS and the Executive Committee of the IAEA. And Dr. Randy Bennett will introduce our keynote speaker, please.
Before introducing our keynote speaker, I'd like to express my personal thanks to the conference organizers, Prasharn, Supatra, and all of the staff of IPST for the superbly orchestrated conference they've put on. What a wonderful program, fantastic banquet, and superb location. Please join me in showing them well-deserved appreciation. Our closing keynote speaker is Gordon Stobart, Professor Emeritus at the Institute of Education of the University of London. Gordon's perspective on assessment is not only an academic one, but one that's informed by his long experience as a secondary school teacher and an examinations officer. Gordon was head of research at London Examinations, Principal Research Officer at the National Council Vocational Qualifications, where he was involved in the development of GNVQ, and research staff member at the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, where he worked on both national curriculum assessment and public examinations. Gordon is a founding member of the Assessment Reform Group and also a noted author. His most recent book is Testing Times, the Uses and Abuses of Assessment, which was published by Routledge in 2008. Gordon is a longtime supporter of IAEA and a good friend to many of those in attendance today. Please welcome Professor Gordon Stobart.
How are we doing? I'll sit down. Can I add my thanks to Randy's, to the organising committee. I would say just a few hours ago we were in this room having the best buffet meal I've ever had, and listening to some wonderful music. So how things can change in a few hours. No food and me. I'd like to thank the organising committee for looking after us so well and so graciously, and particular to Supatra Parthivisan, who has been my minder over the past week and well before that. When you get to my age, you need people to help you find out where you are and tell you what day it is and things like that. So my thanks to Supatra in particular. On Monday, Bill Boyle set the scene. It was a radical analysis of the damaging effects of the impact of much of our testing, the impact it has on learners and on learning and on the classroom. I see Bill as a radical architect who sees a lot about the damaging impact, so would like to demolish the system and rebuild it differently. I see myself as a reforming plumber, which is a little less glamorous, but I see my job as saying we're not going to demolish, we won't get planning permission for that. What we need to do is improve the system from within. So my task, as I see it, is to improve the quality of our examinations, and today I'll be looking at some of the ways we might do this. In summary, exams are not the enemy. The enemy are poor exams and the misuse of results, and that's what we need to address. If we look for ways of doing this, we can see so many problems in the way. It could lead to a kind of inertia, or we just can't get started because there's just so much to do. So I'll begin with a rhetorical question. and that is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. And that's what I'll be doing today. I'll be taking a couple of bites at how I think we can begin to improve our exams. As Randy said, I'm often associated, and I'm proud to be associated with many of the developments in formative assessment for learning. I'm not looking at that in any detail today, but I have been very pleased to hear from colleagues from Singapore, from Hong Kong, from other countries, about how they are, again, trying to incrementally improve teachers' classroom practice, and my support for this. But today I'm going to focus on examinations, and I'm going to focus on examinations for two main reasons. The first is that because IEA is such a powerful group, it's one of the few groupings I know where examiners, policymakers, researchers, and teachers come together to discuss the common issues that they face. And the second reason for addressing exams rather than formative assessment today is that the IEA actually has helped me, that through conferences, has actually moved my thinking quite a lot over the last few years. And I see the importance now that the better the quality of our exams, the more opportunities this gives for formative assessment and helping teachers to use better formative assessment. I won't have time to expand on that much today, but my thinking is if exams don't change, teacher practice isn't going to change. And we're asking them to do formative assessment feels to be at the margins in many cultures. I've said elsewhere that what this feels like is that we do formative assessment during the non-examination years, and that's a good thing. And then when it gets to the examination years, we do the real thing, which is external preparation for external exams. I want to bring the two together. And to do it, I think we need good quality exams in order to bring out some of the good practices of formative assessment. I'll come back to that briefly, but I'm not developing it. The theme of the conference is assessment for future generations. And when we talk about future generations and the legacy of this generation, we often talk in terms of sustainability. We talk about natural resources. How are we going to sustain? We're using them, but we need to leave for the next generation resources in water, oil, fish stocks, whatever it is. So it's what are we leaving the next generation? And I see that fits in with the theme of the conference. So what is sustainable? Well, before I do that, let me I just want to make some of my assumptions clear here. When we started on Monday, our announcers asked the question, does assessment drive the education system? And just to summarize, yes. And it shapes how teachers teach and how learners learn. It also shapes learner identity. What Bill handily calls the metric. The third point, just to reinforce, I think we all know it, but assessment is a social and value-laden process rather than a scientific activity. As exam boards, as examiners, as policymakers, we can't just say all we do is measure what's there. We create what's there. Through our syllabuses, our examinations, we shape what is to be learned and how it is to be learned. So we are part of a social process, and there's a moral responsibility in that for the way we affect learning, the way we drive learning. And Alan Hansen gets that very nicely in this quotation. The individual in contemporary society is not so much described by tests as constructed by them. So if I move on to this idea of what is sustainable assessment, we know what sustainable, the arguments are in terms of natural resources. What would it look like in terms of assessment? I've been greatly helped here by David Bowd, the Australian, who's addressed this topic. And he says, any assessment act must contribute in some way to learning beyond the immediate task. Assessment that meets the needs of the present and prepares students to meet their own future need. And he calls this the double duty of assessment, in which assessment activities have to focus on the immediate task and on implications for equipping students for lifelong learning in an unknown future. They must attend to both the process and the substantive content domain. I see this as a deeply useful way of thinking about the future generations, which are actually the current generation that is coming through and other generations beyond this. It's not enough for us as examiners simply to say we provide a snapshot in the here and now. In taking this snapshot, we are also responsible for the effect of our work, what students carry forward into their futures. Any assessment has an impact on those who are assessed, and we have to ask the question, what are they carrying forward from our examinations? What impact has this had on their learning? What impact on their learner identity? And what I want to do now is, first of all, look at where I think we are now and what, as a plumber, are some of the things I think need fixing fairly quickly. I'll then move on to look at some constructive, I hope, solutions to this, or suggestions, better, about how we might go ahead, some of the things we might need to consider. So where have we got to with assessment? I've put no big changes for 500 years. I could have said no changes for 1,000 years. If we look back at the Chinese civil service exam, a long tradition which I think you could even argue goes back longer than 1,000 years of written examinations. My point is that nothing much has changed since the exams of, say, 500 years ago that the Sung and the Ming dynasties were offering in China. I just want to give you a sample of this because it actually makes our exams look a bit soft. If you were going for the civil service exams, what would happen to you is that you would, first of all, you would arrive at the examination centre, you would be searched, just to check you weren't carrying materials. Then you would be locked in a cell for 3 days in order to do the examination. You'd have examination in 5 subjects. You'd have to write on Confucian classics, you'd have to write poetry, then you'd have to do stuff on history, current affairs, and politics. When you were released from your cell, your script, your exam work, would be copied by somebody else so that nobody could recognize your handwriting, and then it would be double marked. And the result, fewer than 10%, it's estimated, passed these exams. Only 10%, well, often less than that, would go forward to the next round of exams, which was 2 or 3 years later, which had about the same pass rate. And then you would go on to the final round, if you'd managed to get through all that, at which the main invigilator was the emperor himself. So I think one of the conclusions is clearly exams have got easier over the last 500 years. We've just gone soft. Because there were such high stakes exams, because if you got into the Chinese civil service at the imperial level, you were made for life. This was the Mandarin, you became the Mandarin caste, if you like. Because it was high stakes, as in all high stakes exams, we had plenty of cheating. And even the cheating sounds familiar. It would involve carrying in small booklets of answers that were so small you could stick them in your clothing somewhere and you wouldn't be caught, a bit like airport security, you wouldn't be caught with your little miniature crib. Other things included writing on the lining of your clothing the answers. So you went in there with all sorts of things all over, good, question 6, I think that's on my left leg, and this kind of thing. So that was pretty familiar. The idea of somebody else showing up in your place was recognized, though the penalties were a bit severer than we probably operate. A public flogging, something like that. And the final one, which I think is a bit more labor intensive than some of our present cheating, is there were examples of tunneling where your friends appeared dug underground and appeared in your cell and said, do you need any help with these questions? It's a bit easier by having little microphones in your ear and the modern forms of cheating like this. So all I'm suggesting here is that we represent a long tradition in examining, and some of these main things that we get together, we're under secure conditions, we all take the same paper for the same length of time, we try and keep the marking as anonymous as possible, and we decide pass rates, etc. Has not changed in principle for 500 years. I think what has changed, obviously, dramatically, is the scale of exams. We've got millions of students taking exams every year, and the speed and the differences in processing is clearly different. But the actual exam and its impact, I'm suggesting, is not radically different over that. There are changes, and more radical changes, but I'm arguing that these are not yet mainstream. Randy has chronicle some of these possibilities in terms of e-assessment and the like, but I'm not going on with that. What has changed in our students, I think for me, and I'm getting on, I'm allowed to do this kind of reminiscing and start saying things like, in my day, it was all different. But the thing that I notice most is the access to information that the current generation has, and future generations will have even more so. As I was coming to Bangkok from Canada, my 12-year-old nephew told me what the time difference was and what the weather was going to be like next week in Bangkok, because he looked it up on his app on his iPhone. He simply pressed a button, wrote Bangkok, and could tell me all these things. This is an 11-year-old, and I thought I could set the task today, because I know there are, particularly the younger people, but also Randy, who keep their Blackberries actually mute but ever present, in case I get so boring that you want to play battleships or you want to contact somebody, send an email and the like. So I thought the younger generation who are here with their phones probably on, two little tasks. How long would it take you to find out what the population of Alice Springs in Australia is? I'll be asking for answers in about 3 minutes. And also, if I wanted to change Thai money, Thai baht, into Norwegian kroners, how many kroners would I get for 962 Thai baht? The amazing thing is, there are people who will be able to answer this in 2 or 3 minutes. I can wait because I'm busy now, but if you let me know at the end, I'm surprised that we haven't made more use of this, because the historic teaching was that the teacher had the information and the student didn't. And so the job of teaching was didactic. You had to pass on information to the student because it was difficult to get it otherwise. Nowadays, the student probably knows more than the teacher, or can find out more than the teacher about a given topic. And surely the pressure now must be, what do you do with this information, rather than what is the information. It becomes, I think, for the next generation, a question of, given this information, what sense can you make of it? I think we've all Googled where you get 1,050,000 answers to your question in Google, and you could spend all day going through all this stuff. The job is, can I choose effectively what I need to know from all this stuff, including advertising? So that would be my push there. Where are we now? My concern is actually the quality and impact of current tests. And I want to look at 4 threats, I think, to sustainability, to tests doing their double duty, the here and now, and then what we carry forward to the future, what our students, what the learners carry forward to their lifelong learning. The first, and probably the most serious for me, is the limited dependability on tests. And I'm defining dependability as a trade-off between construct validity, reliability, and manageability. Construct validity I'm taking as how well we're sampling what we claim we're assessing, the domain, the subject, the skill, it's that old definition of validity about, is it measuring what it claims to measure? So validity, when I talk about validity, I'm talking about the purpose of the assessment. Is it fit for purpose? Does it effectively sample? I'll come back to what that means. The other point I'd like to make about validity, rather than just construct validity, but when I talk about something having validity, this isn't a property of an examination or a test. It's the process. You don't know whether a test is valid until you see how the results are used. That's the modern theory around validity. It's not that this test is valid. Let me take a very crude example. If we had a perfectly well-constructed maths test, but then we used it as the sole criterion for selecting for arts college, for studying fine arts, it's a good test, but you'd say that's completely invalid because you've used the results for an illegitimate purpose. That is no way to select people for an art course. So validity isn't just about have I got a good paper, it's to do with have I used the results appropriately, have I drawn the right inferences from the results, and that's one of my problems with current examining. The others I'll come back to. The idea of one of the things that inhibits, I think, sustainability is what we've all got, I suspect, the past paper tradition of practice and recall. I'll be asking the question, what do we carry forward from an exam that all we needed to do was to regurgitate, reproduce answers we'd already rehearsed and been told what to do when we see this question? Come back to that. The idea that grades become more important than knowledge tested because it's the grades that get us selected, not whether we actually understand what we've done. I think that's a problem because what do you carry forward from that situation? And too much being read into the results. That's more of a policy issue, and I'll come back to that. Before I move on to the limited dependability, just expanding it a bit more, I'm going to offer a public apology, and that's for the quality of my graphics. I've sat through some wonderful displays from colleagues here. You know, colours flashing up, things coming from the right, PowerPoint things coming from below. Oh, it's like being at the cinema. I'm afraid this is deeply low tech. If it's any consolation, I spent more hours doing this than some of you did because you know how to work it, did getting your light shows in PowerPoint. But so brace yourselves and use your imagination, please. This is a clock. I'm going to come down and just see how bad it looks. So it's a one-handed clock because what I'm trying to demonstrate with it is the idea that all assessment is a trade-off. It's a trade-off between the validity, the reliability, that's over here, and the manageability. And we have to make decisions as examiners, test developers, about where we can only have the hand in one place. So wherever you put it, there's a trade-off with something else. Now, I want to choose 3 examples. The first is an airline pilot. Okay, we're assessing somebody's competence to be an airline pilot. I want my airline pilot to be very high on construct validity. I want them to be assessed on the whole business of flying. I don't want them just assessed on taking off or without any concerns about landing. I want the whole thing. I also want it to be reliable, so I want them to have done lots of flying. I want them to have been assessed a number of times. So I want flight simulations. I want real-time flying in the air before I go anywhere near this pilot. So I want them at about 10 past on this. What's the trade-off? It's very expensive. It's not a manageable process unless you're just dealing with a few thousand individuals. But we say we don't care about the expense because crashing a plane is very expensive. So it's worth spending. It's worth not worrying about the money for training while we're doing this. If I get on my plane tonight and the pilot says, I haven't flown before, but I've got a degree in astrophysics, which puts us down at about 30 minutes, I'm off that plane. I want a valid assessment, a very authentic assessment of what this person can do. If we move round, what we get is a pull towards, the danger is we finish in the 20 minutes to 40 minutes zone, where we're more interested in reliability and manageability than in the validity of what we're assessing. So the trade-off is we don't assess. We say we're assessing, let me give you an example, English in the 11-year-old tests in England. We say we're assessing English, which is made up of writing, reading, speaking and listening. But because speaking and listening is difficult to assess, we drop it. All we assess is reading and writing. All we assess for national reporting is reading and writing. Teachers assess speaking and listening, but we ignore those results. So all the pressure is actually on reading and writing, and yet somebody comes out with a mark, a grade in English. But they haven't been assessed in speaking and listening. And this may happen in language exams as well. So this is being pulled down into this towards the 20 to 40 zone that we want to stay out of. The same might be true of science. If we decide science practicals, which is a really, I would have thought, part of a construct validity is that students can operate and do scientific activities. If we drop that because it's easier to do a pencil and paper test, then we're sliding into the 20 to 40 zone. We're not validly assessing